Chapter 3. Seriously? A history project that lasts an entire term? Peacemaker groaned as he rested his chin on his talons, all the while sitting with his winglet during their lunch break in between their history and self-defense courses. Day 3 into the term, and Peacemaker already was not looking forward to the history course with Webbs, after going to his class for that day, and, to Peacemaker's distaste, already the history teacher was giving the class a do-or-fail assignment. Topic? Anything in Pyrian and Pantalan history about the various dragon tribes within the last 2,000 years. It didn't sound so difficult when it was first announced, and Peacemaker was actually looking forward to it. At first. The moment he began to think of potential topics for the project, he realized he had no idea on what he wanted to contribute to the winglet. It didn't help that the rest of the course winglet was having trouble coming up with a history project. Well, everyone except Hyena, that is. We could talk about the Icewing and Nightwing War, during the reign of Queen Diamond and Queen Vigilance. The Sandwing piped up, tearing into a piece of bird meat. Lots of facts about that conflict not many dragons know about. Peacemaker, Cliff, Jaguar, Alligator, and Tempest glanced at one another at the idea, nodding in approval. Though Peacemaker nodded simply because he thought if anything his classmates could come up with, then it had to be good. He knew some history, but ancient history? It was always hard to remember names and dates. It looked like his winglet had reached an agreement. At least, until Ermine spoke up. "We can't do that one," she said, reading a book written from a Silkwing author all the way in Pantala. "And why not?" Hyena asked, raising a brow at the Icewing. "Already spoke with Stoat from the Jade Winglet. He said they chose that one, and already submitted this to Webbs for approval," Ermine explained, flipping a page as she ate a piece of meat. Peacemaker sighed, and back to square one. The winglet bounced ideas off of each other, and Peacemaker simply agreed with what was suggested, though these ideas were either shot down, or agreed upon certain ideas were too popular or unoriginal. For the longest time, Peacemaker was starting to wonder if, 3 days in, history class would not go well, with no idea to report by the next time they met for Webbs' class. But a snap of two talents caught everyone's attention, as Cliff smiled as he came up with an idea. "The reign of Queen Carmine," Cliff announced to his winglet. Queen Carmine? Who was that? "The Skywing Queen during Darkstalker's time?" Tempest asked, earning a nod from Cliff. "The one and only," Cliff said, grinning, leaning forward to grab one of the strawberries Peacemaker had gathered as a side for the winglet's lunch. Outside of a few mentions about her in the stories about the Seawing Royal Massacre, in which one of her daughters, Princess Sunset, was murdered by Prince Albatross during his rampage, Mother tells me she is not really well known by many of the tribes. "Except," Jaguar said, rubbing his chin and smirking, "by the Skywing royal family, which you are a part of." Was Jaguar complimenting Cliff? "Why, yes," Cliff said, also noticing, smiling at the thought of Jaguar finally being impressed with him. "Glad you've been paying attention, Jaguar." "So, since we have a Skywing Royal in our winglet," Jaguar looked at the others, a mischievous glint in his eye, "it's probably best we avoid using him as a source in our project. I mean, for the sake of avoiding the obvious bias he has." And the metaphorical magical despot had been shot. Peacemaker was relieved that Queen Chlorate never heard of Nightwing Dragonets in the forest saying that. "What do you mean, biased?" Cliff shouted, aggravated by, yet again, another turnaround from Jaguar. "I can be neutral." Tempest made a small, fake cough, in order to calm down the potential argument between the two. "Jaguar, please," she said sternly at the Rainwing, who simply shrugged his wings and chomped on his lunch. The Seawing turned her attention to the fuming Skywing. "While we probably can't use Queen Carmine's reign as example, for reasons Jaguar stated," Tempest held up a talon to stop Cliff, "you did, however, have a good idea, Cliff." Cliff raised a brow. "Oh?" the Skywing Prince asked, earning everyone, including Peacemaker, and, to his surprise, Ermine, who put the book down. Tempest looked at her winglet and smiled. "The Seawing Royal Massacre. Does anyone know when, exactly, it was taking place?" Tempest asked her winglet. There was a pause with the entire winglet. When did it take place? Wait. Peacemaker could have sworn he recalled something. A little something about the massacre his mother told him when he asked her about animus dragons. The Skywings being present was important. Almost like... Peacemaker suddenly got it. It happened during a summit! Peacemaker exclaimed. A little too excited, he had to admit. But he didn't care, as Tempest Nod made him mentally cheer that he got it right. Precisely, Tempest said, before looking at the others. Queen Lagoon wanted to negotiate with the Skywings about villages her tribe was building upon the shores of the Sky Kingdom. Which Queen Carmine did not appreciate, Cliff said, remembering that bit of information. Tempest continued. But there was one other detail Queen Lagoon was interested in delving into. An alliance. Alliance? Peacemaker asked. What for? Tempest looked over at Jaguar and said, Does the name Queen Anaconda sound familiar? Jaguar looked at Tempest, mouth dropped wide open, as if he just now remembered something important. Which Peacemaker was still lost. Queen Anaconda? He had heard her name. She was Queen Glory's distant ancestor, after all. But aside from knowing she was a powerful queen, not much else did Peacemaker know about her. Jaguar, however, seemed to know a lot more than he did. Queen Anaconda, Jaguar said, nodding at Tempest's question. According to some history grandeur still kept, in order to remember her lineage, and shared with our tribe, Queen Anaconda was the Rainwing's fiercest queen. Fierce enough to make even Queen Lagoon, who had 2 animus dragons in her tribe, to seek an alliance with Queen Carmine in hopes of overcoming a threat from the Rainforce, along with the Mudwings that were allied with the Rainwings, Tempest concluded, looking at her clawmates as Peacemaker and the others looked at each other. Peacemaker's eyes met with Cliff, who looked a bit put down about his idea being shot down, but he did nod at him as if he agreed about the topic. As long as everyone else agreed, Peacemaker was all for whatever topic his clawmates chose. When everyone raised their hands when it came to vote, it was decided. The court's winglet would study the reign of Queen Anaconda and what the Rainwing politics were like 2,000 years ago. While Jaguar and Alligator volunteered to tell Webbs they had chosen the topic, Ermine and Tempest agreed to go to the Academy Library to find books on Anaconda's reign, though Cliff had insisted he go and look for texts about the Queen. I'm already done with lunch, Cliff said, scraping the bones from his meal away as he stood. Besides, I want to get to work on something. Anyways. Before anyone could rebuttal, Cliff stood up and walked out of the Praise Center without a word. What scavenger crawled into his mouth and made him grumpy? Jaguar wondered, looking at the rest of the winglet. I mean, I wanted to get under his scales, but I didn't expect to take the wind out of his wings like that. That was something Peacemaker noticed so far about his cave mates. Ever the ones to try and outdo the other. In the past 3 days when classes began, they were always trying to get work done fast and accurately and turn it in on time. Cliff appeared to be unusually put down right now. Picking up the food he hadn't finished and storing them in his bag, Peacemaker stood up and followed his clawmate. I'll check up on him, Peacemaker told the others, quickly trotting out of the Praise Center after the Skywing Prince, while making sure he did not rudely interrupt others' lunchtime conversations with his hurriedness. Making his way to the Academy's library was not that difficult. Since the first day of school, Peacemaker had visited the library at least 3 times, all of which occurred after a meal when he had enough time for a class or during his breaks in the middle of the day. What was there not to like about the library? It was quiet, had a peaceful atmosphere when compared to the busyness of the classroom, and how the common cave always reminded Peacemaker of sleep, something he was not too fond of as of late. And then there was the librarian, Starfight, the Nightwing of the, once, Dragonets of Prophecy. He was always nice enough to give Peacemaker something to do while in the library, or point out any scrolls that might interest him. Peacemaker noted he needed to thank Moon for telling Starflight about his favorite stories when she visited in a few weeks. Turning a corner towards the library entrance, Peacemaker felt himself collide with someone, and the sounds of scrolls clattering to the floor followed an oof sound from both he and the dragon he bumped into. Oh, 3 moons, sighed a Nightwing dragon as she picked herself up and looked at Peacemaker. Sorry about that. Peacemaker, quickly getting to his feet to help his fellow student, shook his head. No, it's my fault. I shouldn't have walked too quickly, he said as he helped her pick up the scrolls. After collecting a few, Peacemaker glanced at the Nightwing, seeing her black scales had a dark violet tint to them. He recognized her. Shade Hunter, right? He asked. She looked up at him and nodded, recognizing him as well. Yes, and you're Peacemaker, right? She said, to which it was his turn to nod. Yeah, he answered. Nice to meet you. Well, officially. Like most of the Rainwings and Nightwings he knew, Peacemaker had seen Shade Hunter in passing, but rarely interacted with her back home. His mother would take him to the forge that Shade Hunter's father owned and operated. The two would wave at each other, but hardly interact. But Peacemaker always silently admired Shade Hunter's crafts she would make at the primary school, using her fire to heat metal and then carefully manipulate it in a certain way to create beautiful ornaments for the holidays Rainwings and Nightwings celebrated together. In truth, Peacemaker still had a bunch of ornaments she had made for his class, and they still hung up in his room back at home. Shade Hunter, in response to Peacemaker's words, smiled. Yeah, it's nice to meet the famous Rainbow Wing, she said, referencing his popular nickname back at school, which Peacemaker admitted he liked. Looking past Shade Hunter into the library, Peacemaker tried to get a good look for the slightest second and see if Cliff was inside, while trying not to seem rude to Shade Hunter. Looking for Prince Cliff? Shade Hunter asked, apparently noticing his eyes wandering for a moment, which Peacemaker admitted was impressive how she noticed his quick glance. He nodded. Is he still in there? Didn't see him, though I heard Starflight greet him while I was searching for some scrolls about Pantala, she answered, gesturing to the scroll she had on her arm. Thanks, Peacemaker said, gratefully. At least Cliff was actually going to the library. I'm going to help him with getting some scrolls for Webbs' project. I'd better not keep you then, Shade Hunter said, stepping to the side to let him through. It was nice speaking with you, Peacemaker. Good luck. To you as well, Shade Hunter. Peacemaker nodded as he said his farewell to Shade Hunter and made his way into the library. He had to admit, it was nice to actually meet Shade Hunter, face to face. He had always seen her from the distance, but never spoke to her. Perhaps this was the purpose of having 5 students from each tribe? To help students from the same tribe get to know one another if they had never met prior. He had to admit, he liked that. Walking into the library, he approached the librarian's desk, but did not find Starflight present. Peacemaker frowned, looking around the library itself and the various rows of shelves that filled the cave. According to Moon, the Academy Library had grown in 7 years since its opening. Once a decently sized library, now had many books from the different tribes along with books from Pantala. Starflight and his mate had insisted on filling the library with as many tomes as possible, to give the students a wealthy amount of information at their talent tips. And with the increase of scrolls and books also meant the library's cave expanded, adding various floors to search. Walking around the library for a few moments awarded Peacemaker with finding Starflight. The blind librarian himself was almost effortlessly walking around his library as if he could see from behind his blindfold. Approaching the librarian, noisily enough so Peacemaker could let Starflight know he was approaching. Starflight? Peacemaker said, causing the librarian to look in his general direction and smile, recognizing his voice. Peacemaker, the librarian answered, turning around to him. How is the tale of the Blizzard Wings? Peacemaker smiled at Starflight's genuine question. He appreciated the librarian's curiosity into what the students checked out. When it came to books and scrolls, Starflight was ever the one to get into big conversations about them. It's great. At the part where they are stuck in, well, the blizzard, Peacemaker explained. Not really sure if they will get out of it. Keep reading to find out. Trust me, Starflight said, smiling. Clearly, he had read the scroll, but did not want to spoil the story. Here to help Cliff? Peacemaker perked up at his question. Know where he's at? Second floor. Should be in the section about past queens, Starflight replied, gesturing to the general direction. Heard his footsteps not too long ago. He should still be up there. Thanks, Starflight, Peacemaker said, preparing to go in that direction. But before he did, he paused and glanced at Starflight as he continued on about his business. Any word from Fatespeaker yet? Starflight stopped and nodded in Peacemaker's direction. Icarus delivered a letter from her, Starflight said. She'll be coming back to the Academy a week early. Starflight paused, clearly thinking of something before he continued. There is something she wants to tell me, face to face. Peacemaker wondered what Starflight's mate could only talk about in person, rather than over a letter. Hopefully it was something good. Well, it'll be good to meet her, Peacemaker replied, which Starflight agreed with a nod as he went about his routine. It did not take long for Peacemaker to find the area of the library on the history of the previous queens of Pyria. Located on the second floor, the section was cluttered with scrolls covering the lives of many queens, both the good and the bad ones, along with their policies and their impact on the continent and their society. Sure enough, Peacemaker found a certain red Skywing searching through the section. Though he was not looking through the area of the Rainwing Queens, he was looking at the section on the Skywing rulers, his ancestry. In his neck bag were a few scrolls, though Peacemaker couldn't tell if they were on the topic the Winglet had decided. All the while he looked through this section, Cliff looked disappointed. Peacemaker wanted to approach his clawmate, but he wasn't sure if he should, especially if Cliff was not interested in talking. He could wait near somewhere close by, then talk to Cliff when he was feeling better. But the decision was made for him when Cliff looked in Peacemaker's direction, surprised. "Oh, Peacemaker," Cliff said, surprisingly quiet. "I was, just getting some stuff for the project." "Yeah," Peacemaker answered, not pointing out that this wasn't the section on the Rainwing Queens. But he did not want to make things worse. "Need some help?" Cliff shook his head. "Actually, I already got some scrolls in Queen Anaconda," he said, gesturing to his bag. "Just..." The Skywing Prince closed his eyes and sighed. "Thought I would look at the family tree." Peacemaker briefly glanced at a scroll, and saw the writing on one beside him. Queen Scarlet. This made Peacemaker shift a little. Scarlet, Cliff's grandmother and Queen Ruby's immediate predecessor, and perhaps the most cruel and sadistic queen of the Skywing Kingdom in the Skywing tribe's history. Walking up to the scroll, Peacemaker took it out and glanced at it. Beside him, Cliff looked down at the scroll of his grandmother. He could hear Cliff huff in disgust at the name of his grandmother. "She was cruel," Cliff said, echoing Peacemaker's and, basically, the rest of the continent's thoughts. "Only saw her a few times when I was a dragonette, and I hated her." Peacemaker nodded as he slid the scroll back onto the shelf and looked at Cliff, who looked back at him. "What's wrong?" Peacemaker asked, concerned. "It's nothing," Cliff responded, rather coldly, but Peacemaker wasn't convinced. "Is it what Jaguar said?" Peacemaker asked, knowingly pushing the boundaries. But he did not like seeing someone like Cliff down, especially if they were his clawmate. "I don't think he meant to be rude, you know." "I said it is nothing," Cliff snapped, surprising Peacemaker, and quickly turned around abruptly and walked away. "Sorry," Peacemaker said, apologetically as his wings fell to his sides. Cliff stopped just before exiting the section, and made a deep sigh as he looked back at Peacemaker. Raising a wing, the Skywing Prince waved him over, which Peacemaker accepted as he trotted up to Cliff and walked with him. "It's not what that rather annoying Rainwing said," Cliff clarified as they made their way to the seating area, and sat on some cushions as Cliff poured the scrolls from his bag out onto a table in front of them. "Then, what was it?" Peacemaker asked, picking up a scroll on the family of Queen Anaconda. Cliff sighed and said, "Do you know who the Skywing Queen was before Scarlet ascended to the throne?" Peacemaker thought for a moment, trying to remember, but he kept drawing blanks at any possible Skywing Queens before Ruby or Scarlet. He shook his head, and Cliff nodded, rather sympathetically, as if that was the answer he'd been expecting. No surprise, since Scarlet was on the minds of every Skywing, even before the Sandwing War of Succession. She was always cruel. Cliff paused before continuing gravelly. The war itself was only an opportunity for her fetish in seeing dragons kill each other go unrestrained due to that war. "But what does this have to do with the project?" Peacemaker asked. He thought this would be something Cliff would want to forget. A family member so cruel and evil. "Your mom has been good for your tribe, hasn't she?" "Of course she has," Cliff said, his voice lifting, smiling at the thought of his mother, whom he no doubt loved and wanted to make proud as her son. But I don't want dragons to think that the history of the Skywings started with Scarlet. He sighed, closing his eyes as he rolled up a scroll he'd been looking at. The Skywings have had a bloody history. I know that. But our history did not start with Scarlet. Nor will it end with my mother. Cliff sighed. My mother doesn't plan to have another dragonette. She doesn't want to be put in a position of killing a daughter, like how Scarlet killed my aunts. The prince looked at Peacemaker, showing a determined expression. If I have a daughter who succeeds my mother, then I want to take as much opportunity to show that the Skywings have had a long history, just like any other tribe. I wanted to take the opportunity with this project. This made sense, Peacemaker admitted to himself. Cliff was not trying to be controlling nor prideful. He was trying to share his tribe's history to not only other Skywing students, but with the students from other tribes. Even if it was a small detail, like a project, he wanted to be a patriot to his tribe, to let others know that the Skywings had successes and mistakes, like any other tribe. In honesty, Peacemaker sympathized with his clawmate. Even though he was not a full-blooded Rainwing, he was still one on his father's side. The reign of Queen Glory was always seen as the beginning of the Rainwing tribe, that there was no other history before them. As a dragon with Rainwing blood, he hated the lingering stereotype of being lazy, just as Cliff, no doubt, hated the idea that the stereotypes that plagued the Skywings about being superstitious savages. Peacemaker wondered, was there a way to satisfy Cliff while not going against the vote of the rest of the court's winglet? Then, it hit him. Well, maybe you could mention Skywing history, Peacemaker asked, causing Cliff to look at him, a brow raised. What do you mean? Queen Lagoon wanted an alliance with the Skywings, right? Cliff nodded at this. Peacemaker continued. Well, what if we included how Queen Anaconda's reign affected the Skywings? We could include information about Queen Carmine's reign. This caused the prince to visibly think. Eventually, a small smile came across his lips, and nodded slowly. That doesn't sound like a bad idea, Peacemaker. Cliff pondered aloud, smiling at him. Think the others will want to do that? Peacemaker shrugged. We won't know if we don't ask, right? Peacemaker said, gathering the scrolls Cliff collected. Cliff chuckled. Well, we better ask, Cliff answered, accepting the scrolls Peacemaker had collected, and placed them in his bag. Let's talk about it when we are all in the common cave. Peacemaker nodded, glad that the Skywing Prince's attitude had uplifted. The bronze gong suddenly rang across the school, signaling the end of the lunch period, and the beginning of the next class. Come on, Cliff said, patting Peacemaker on the shoulder. I'll check this out, and we can head to Clay's self-defense class together. Sounds good, Peacemaker replied as he stood up and followed Cliff down to Starflight's desk. As the two reached the ground floor of the library, something caught in the corner of Peacemaker's eye. He could have sworn he saw someone with black scales in one of the reading areas of the library, with a flash of silver scales on the corner of their eyes. Almost like moons. Wait. Peacemaker's head swerved to the direction of the dragons, only to find no one there. Peace? Cliff's voice came from ahead of him. Peacemaker looked towards his clawmate, who had stopped a few steps ahead of him, confused. You okay? Peacemaker began, looking back at the corner. He could have sworn he saw the dragon. Nothing, he continued, trotting back up to Cliff. You sure? Cliff asked as they continued walking. You looked excited for a moment. Peacemaker sighed, thinking to the trick his mind played on him. I miss my mom, and my friend, Moonwatcher. Cliff said sympathetically, scratching his chin. The mind reader, the two continued walking. She was in Peril's winglet. Yeah, he smiled at the stories Moon had told them when she still attended the academy, and before Peril had officially joined the Jade Winglet. Peril tell you about her adventures with Moon and the others? Yes, Cliff said, chuckling about something. Though her version of the events are probably different than what Moonwatcher told you. When she tells a story, Peril sometimes gets sidetracked. This made Peacemaker chuckle. That sounded like Moon's description of Peril's personality. get into a conversation with her, and she's able to branch the conversation into over 100 different conversations, somehow related to each other. Then the topic would return to what was originally discussed. Thinking of Peril only made him think of Moon, his oldest friend. The brief image that looked like Moon made him miss her more, and he hoped that the next month would go by fast so she'd be able to visit him. While he walked with Cliff out of the library, after checking out the scrolls, Peacemaker saw that Starlight was looking at a letter, running his talons over the dots that lined the parchment, the same one Icarus had delivered from Fatespeaker. Suddenly, Peacemaker had an idea. Moon. Just wanted to write to you and say, hi. Well, hi. Okay, so that is not everything I wanted to write, but it's a start, right? It's the third day of classes, and so far the Academy has been a great experience. Maybe it's too soon to tell, but my winglet is filled with an interesting bunch. I'm in the Quartz winglet with Prince Cliff, by the way. I hope your trips have been safe and that diplomacy has been good. I know that there are times you wish that you could stop being a diplomat, but we both know you're really good at representing us to the other queens. I hope that Icarus can deliver this letter during your stop to the Sand Kingdom. If not, maybe Kibble will give it to you. How is Kibble, by the way? You haven't mentioned him in your last few letters. Is Queen Thorn keeping him busy? I know the Talons of Power are still around, but they should be harmless by now, right? Anyways, unless you see this letter in one of your visions before it gets to you, I hope you get this as soon as possible. I really look forward to your visit, Moon. Well, I guess I should be going now. Almost time for bed. Hope all is well. Love, Peacemaker. After rereading the letter for the third time, and pleased with what he wrote, Peacemaker smiled as he rolled up the letter and placed it into his sleeve in order to protect it from damage. Icarus would be departing the next day, so he would give it to the messenger Skywing in the morning before classes. With the letter done, Peacemaker glanced back from the table he sat at in his winglet's common cave, and saw that the rest of his clawmates were going about their evening business before going to bed. Tempest was trying to convince Ermine to come and join her, and, most likely, speak with the rest of the winglet. But the Icewing was perfectly content with what she was doing, going over the classwork she had gotten over the day and getting it finished, despite the work being due by the week's end. He made a mental note to take care of the assignments he had received today. He'd worry about them tomorrow morning during first break. Cliff was going over a scroll with Hyena, who wrote down some information about Queen Carmine's reign, and how it was affected by the Rainwing tribe. Alligator was with them, though he was busy reading a book on scavengers, written by a Highwing author from Pantala. Jaguar was coming towards Peacemaker, actually. "Who are you writing?" asked the Rainwing as he handed Peacemaker a cup of juice, which he took gratefully. "Moonwatcher," Peacemaker answered, standing up, stretching for a moment, and making his way over to the side of the common cave, where everyone kept food for snack on. And, sure enough, Peacemaker found a good amount of strawberries to snack on. "Moon?" Jaguar asked while drinking from his own cup. "The mind reader and seer?" "Well, she doesn't exactly call herself a seer, but yes, she can see the future," he answered, thinking about his oldest friend. "She can't look into the future, but the visions do come to her." Alligator took his gaze from his book for a moment. It looked like something just clicked in his mind while hearing Peacemaker speak. "Wait, Moonwatcher? Isn't the Nightwing from the original Jade Winglet?" Alligator asked, almost excitedly. Yeah, the one and only," Peacemaker responded. He couldn't think of anyone else named Moonwatcher other than his best friend. Okay, Moon and her winglet had once met a Silkwing named Luna, whose name translated to Moon in Old Pantalan, but that was different. Upon hearing his answer, Alligator looked intrigued. "So if you're friends with Moonwatcher, you most likely know some of the others in her old winglet, right?" Well, he had to think for a moment. Sure, he knew most of the dragons in Moon's old winglet. He knew Kibble, Moon's mate. The Sandwing would normally come visit the rainforest when Moon spent a few weeks in her home. Kibble was always fun to play with, especially in hide-and-seek or guessing games, the latter of which he always seemed to know what Peacemaker was thinking. Sometimes he wondered if Kibble was the one with mind-reading powers. Whenever Moon traveled with Kibble, or went on diplomatic missions, there was always Kinkajou who'd keep Peacemaker company. She was even the one who helped him learn how to change the colors of the stars on his wing membranes. Turtle was someone Peacemaker knew, though he rarely interacted with the Sealing Prince and Animus. Most interactions happened when Kinkajou was present. But Turtle was Kinkachu's friend. A close one, he might add. So Peacemaker always considered him a friend. Peril? Well, he knew of her, but never met the flame-scaled dragon. Though if Peacemaker were honest, he could understand why she wouldn't visit the rainforest. As for the Icewing and Mudwing of the Winglet, he never met either, nor knew their names. Whoever the two dragons were, Moon and Kibbley rarely spoke of them. Especially the Icewing. While the Mudwing was talked about, they tended to avoid mentioning their Icewing friend, who was apparently an Icewing Royal. Well? Came Alligator's voice, and this caused Peacemaker to come out of his thoughts, noticing all eyes of the Winglet, even Ermine's, were now on him, waiting for an answer. I know most, Peacemaker answered, honestly with a shrug of his wings. Moon's my best friend. She was present during my hatching. Kibbley and Kinkachu I also know from when I was small. I have seen Turtle. Peril never visited the rainforest. Everyone seemed to doubt this, especially Cliff. But I don't know the Icewing nor the Mudwing. Moon rarely spoke about them. Upon hearing that, Alligator's wings fell, and his eyes looked at his book, almost disappointedly. Oh, Alligator answered. Hyena looked at Alligator sympathetically. What's wrong? Cliff asked, noticing a sudden drop in the Mudwing's mood. Well... Alligator really wanted to say something. Despite being disappointed, he also showed a hint of excitement. Beside him, Hyena brushed her wing against his own, giving him a nod of encouragement. Alligator glanced at his friend, and then took a deep breath while adjusting his glasses. Well, I'm just a follower of one of the original Jade Winglet's work. His research into scavengers is very extensive, Alligator explained, looking down at the book he was reading before closing it. He was also in charge of building the largest scavenger sanctuary on Pyria, perhaps even the largest in the world. Peacemaker tilted his heads. One of Moon's friends was studying scavengers? And operated a sanctuary? Wait a minute. Large scavenger sanctuary? There's only one sanctuary he could think of that was apparently large and safe. Wait, Peacemaker said, looking at his clawmate with curiosity. You mean the sanctuary in... well, sanctuary? The town the queens meet for their quarterly summits? The very one, Alligator said, smiling at Peacemaker's curiosity. Unlike kennels and cages that some royals have their pet scavengers, Sanctuary is large and is set in an environment that aims to be less restrictive as possible. From her place near the wall of the common came, where she normally read, Ermine made a visible and her attention was actually away from the scroll for a moment. You're talking about Prince Winter, aren't you? Ermine asked, actually intrigued by the conversation, much to Peacemaker and Cliff's surprise. He's not really a prince anymore, Hyena responded. I mean, Queen Snowfall is adamant in keeping him in exile, from what I've heard. No argument there, Ermine answered, nodding at this. The name of the Icewing from Moon's Winglet was Winter? Why hadn't anyone from Moon's Old Winglet mentioned him to Peacemaker? Yeah, I remember Peril mentioning him, Cliff spoke up, tapping his claw on the ground as he visibly thought back on something. Always said he was cold. Well, not as cold as most Icewings. No offense, Ermine. Ermine huffed at Cliff's comment. Peacemaker at first thought this was at the idea of Icewings being strict, but then he realized, after remembering how Ermine was critical of her own tribe system, that it was the fact that the Scouting Prince had made a pun. And Cliff didn't even realize it until after Ermine's reaction. Pun intended, of course. He corrected himself. From her place around the fire, Peacemaker heard Tempest stifle a laugh by placing her wing over her face to block the giggle. Rolling her eyes, Ermine continued, My people are indeed strict, and Prince Winter, from what I've heard, is certainly no different. She paused, closing her scroll. But I always admired him, even if my mother and father told me he was a traitor for ruining the diamond trial. Alligator scoffed at hearing the mention of whatever a diamond trial was. Only Icewing nobles, nowadays, would think ending a trial meant to have two dragonets kill each other for their name on a wall and increase in rank would be considered treason, Alligator muttered bitterly. Wait, dragonets killing each other for a higher place in circles was the diamond trial? That's wrong, Peacemaker said, being honest with himself and the others. And what happened to Moon's friend was wrong too. Ermine was silent, gently running a talon down the side of her scroll. It was, she agreed on both of Peacemaker's statements, He is an exile, but he's allowed to visit his brother every few months in the Ice Kingdom. But not for too long. Queen Snowfall doesn't like seeing him around. Peacemaker glanced back at Alligator as he stared down at the cover of his book. He could see his eyes looking at the title and the authors of the book. A Forgotten Legacy, an in-depth study into scavenger habits, anthropology, and theories. Written by Winter, founder of the Sanctuary Scavenger Preserve, and Cricket, founding professor of Reading Monkey Studies. Alligator suddenly picked up his scroll as he stood up from his cushion and gave a rather fake yawn for his winglet to hear. Night, everyone, Alligator said, waving a wing at his clawmates behind him. So early? Jaguar asked, raising a brow. I mean, it's not fully dark out, and it seems a little early, and I'm a rainwing. Alligator ignored Jaguar as he stepped into his and Hyena sleeping cave. It was strange to Peacemaker. While the winglet spoke about Winter, he seemed genuinely interested in the conversation. But as it came to an end, he had suddenly seemed down again. Surely a conversation about his hero would surely lighten his mood. Unless it wasn't just about simply talking about his admiration for the Icewing. Did he hope Peacemaker might have met his hero and have information to share with him about the founder of the Sanctuary Scavenger Preserve? That would explain the mood. Looking at the scroll he had written for Moon, he unraveled it, looking at the length of blank space he had left. That moment, Peacemaker suddenly thought of an idea. P.S. Moon, I have a clawmate in my winglet, a mudwing named Alligator. He was reading a book written by one of his heroes, an Icewing named Winter. He says that Winter was part of the original Jade Winglet. Do you still keep in touch with him? If you do, perhaps you could write and mention Alligator to him and see if he's willing to write Alligator? That way they can bounce ideas about scavengers off of each other. Who knows, maybe they could become friends. By the way, I know you mentioned Winter, not by name, to Mom and I multiple times in the past, and Mom seems to know him. I know why Peril never came to the rainforest, but why haven't I met Winter or your Mudwing clawmate?